Blog Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afurakanu Afuraitkaitnut, Neye Ojirada, Medinde Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akhan. Aakhuamuman, Amaruka, Atifi, Odwirafo. That means greetings to all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, people, meaning Africans, Black people. Today is ODWIRA Day, Purification Day. My name is Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akhan. Odwirafo of the Akwamu Nation in North America. Odwiraman Mu, within Odwiraman, the purified nation of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast. Once again, we are opening up the chat room right now. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make in the chat room, log in as a user in order to interact in the chat room. If you don't have a username in Blog Talk, you can sign up for one quickly in Blog Talk, and therefore you'll be able to interact in the chat room. If you have a question or a comment on the phone line, simply hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised, and then we can interact in the chat room. So we just on the phone line. So we're just rebooting the chat room right now because it looks like it's taking a minute to come up. In the meantime, for those who are new to our broadcast, we have 3 broadcasts on a weekly basis. On Joda, Monday nights, we have Akhan Nanason, Ancient Authentic Akhan Ancestral Religion, where we deal specifically with the Akhan expression of ancestral religion. Of course, there's misinformation being propagated in the Western Hemisphere as well as on the continent by those who have been infected with white culture, pseudo-religion like Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism and so forth, and white culture in general. And because of those infections, the presentation of Akhan culture and cosmology and philosophy and ancestral religious practice and so forth has been corrupted and is typically put forward in a misinformed fashion. So we go and deal with ancient, authentic Akhan ancestral religion on Joda on Monday night, dealing with our ancestral connection to ancient Khanat, which is a title of ancient Nubia. Our people migrated from Khanat to reestablish the ancient empire in the western part of the continent. The region of the empire of Khanat was so-called Ghana a couple of thousand years ago. Some of our people were then migrated about 1,000 years after that towards the forest belt, the regions of today's Republic of Ghana and Ivory Coast. And then some of our people were forced into the Western Hemisphere during the Mmusuo Kese, the Great Perversity, the Enslavement era. So this is how Akhan people migrated to the western part of the continent from the eastern part of the continent in ancient times. And we continued that ancestral religious practice. And even when some of our people were forced into the Western Hemisphere, we continued our ancestral religious practice, which manifested in the Akhan ancestral religion in North America in the form of hoodoo, as we have talked about in our publications, in South America as Ween tea, and in Jamaica as Obia and so forth. So we deal with the nature and function of the divinities, the ancestresses and ancestors. We deal with the nature and function of the Deity, the Obosom, the NHOMA, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, the great mother and great father, the supreme being, Inyamewa and Inyame, the creator and creatress, Inyokumpon and Inyokunton, and so forth. Various different topics we deal with on Akhan Nanason. Give me 1 second. It looks like there's a problem with the chat room. So we want to make sure people can get in with the chat room. We rebooted it a couple of times. And while that's coming up, we also have on Jirada, Purification Day, we have, of course, Benada, Apanada Tuesdays. We deal with ancestral religion in general, not just the Akhan expression, but ancestral religion, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religion, as it impacts every aspect of our lives as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. Ancestral religion, in essence, is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject, we need to repel, to repulse, to hate, in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and restore and realign ourselves with order. So this is what we deal with on ODWIRA Purification Day. We deal with text from ancient Kemet as well as ritual practices, text, oral literature, ancestral information, communication, various aspects of the culture from not just ancient Kemet and Khanat, but wherever we have migrated or were forced to migrate in the world and continue to manifest our ancestral religious practice. We always say that purification, Jira, operationalizes Nanasom. Purification operationalizes our ritual practice of incorporating law and restoring balance. So this is why we say the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. Through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to realign our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. The expansive and contractive poles are governed by Ma'ah and Ma'at, which are the expansive poles, the law pole of divine order, and Harubehudet and Sechima are the contractive poles, male and female divinities that govern the contractive poles of divine order. So the expression of order is divine law or love, which is the same word and concept. The impression of divine order is divine hate, the divine rejection of disorder, the maintenance of divine order. So when we talk about ancestral religion, we incorporate law and restore balance through ritual. That is the essence. Jira, or purification, operationalizes Nanasom. Purification operationalizes our practice of ritually incorporating law and ritually restoring balance to our lives. That is every thought, every intention, and every action, every moment of every day, we always seek to align ourselves or realign ourselves with divine order. So this is our ancestral religious culture. So this is what we deal with on Ujira, Purification Day, and so forth. And we just did the reboot one more time. And we want to make sure to see if Blog Talk is having some technical problems. Looks like the chat room is starting to open up now. And in the meantime, we're going to make sure that people can get on in the chat room once you log into the chat room. Okay, so one individual said that there's a audio issue online, so let us know if you're in the chat room, let us know if you can hear us clearly. If you're on the phone line, if you can hear clearly, just hit the number 1 so we can see your hand is raised so we can know that you can hear the audio clearly. And that message in the chat room, okay, cool. And it took a minute for the chat room to come up, so we have to see maybe some people were not able to get into the online at first or call in at first. It looked like Blog Talk was having a couple of issues. So, but yeah, send us a message in the chat room to make sure you can hear clearly. It looks like a couple other people are starting to pop up in the call queue, so it must be working properly now. And we want to make sure the chat room is working as well. One person saying that on the phone is good, but online there's no audio, but then somebody else is saying they can hear online. Okay, so you might have to log out and log back in, because it looks like now it's starting to pop up. Okay, so, and the third broadcast we have on a weekly basis, of course, is on Awukuda, Akwada, Wednesday. And we have Egua Marketplace. And on the Egua Marketplace show, we showcase Afurakani, African Black businesses, organizations, and institutions who are serving our community in a positive capacity, who also maintain and convey their ancestral religious values in the context of their service to the community. So we have had a number of individuals come onto the broadcast, sit with us for 2 hours and talk about their business, their organization, their institution, their philosophy behind serving the community rooted in their ancestral religious values. In that vein, we have published the OCOM Economic Development Model, which is an economic development model, an approach to economic development rooted in our Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religious values. So it's a holistic approach to economic development rooted in our values. When you go to the OCOM Economic Development Model page, you will see the publication that we released, which you can download for free, of course, OCOM Economic Development Model. You can also see the 4-part series we did on Blog Talk, explicating that model and showing how it impacts every aspect of our lives as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. You'll also see 2 other broadcasts, Nokwarifo Ne Amamre, Self-Employment and Ancestral Culture, and also Eguakundi, Economic Warfare. You download those as well, and you will also see the list of businesses, organizations, and institutions that we have been supporting. That's a growing list as a community. The businesses, organizations, and institutions, those who have come onto the show, we are targeting one business, organization, or institution per week for 52 weeks for optimal capital infusion. So part of the OCOM Economic Development Model is the strategy to starve the beast and feed the prize. That means on a weekly basis we make a determination about what funds we would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring, and then we starve the beast and feed the prize. We reallocate those funds away from those white businesses and direct them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. And of course, we are targeting one per week for 52 weeks. We began that process in February as a community, supporting these businesses, starving the beast and feeding the prize. When you take $10 or $15 you would have wasted in the course of a week at a 7-Eleven or a CVS or some other white business, and you starve that white beast and feed the prize, then that's an infusion of capital into that business. When 1,000 people of our people engage that process, that's a $10,000 or $15,000 infusion of capital into a black business in the course of 1 week, so that they can serve the black community at a greater capacity, so they can hire black people within the business, so they can have employment and also service at a greater capacity, and also put those white businesses out of business in our community. If we do not engage this process, by default, financing our own oppression by leaving our funds in the hands of our absolute enemies, the whites and their offspring, whether they are white Europeans, white Americans, white Hispanics, white Latinos, white pseudo-Native Americans, white Asians, white Hindus, white Arabs, all non-Afurakani, non-Afuraitkaitnit, non-African, non-black people are Odwirafo, spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring, our enemies, and we are financing our enemies and therefore our own oppression when we do not engage the process consistently of starving the beast and feeding the prize. Whenever we get a chance, we need to engage that process, so we target one business, organization, or institution per week to engage that process. So this is what we deal with on Akua Marketplace, and you see the list of businesses, organizations, and institutions who have come onto the show on the OCOM Economic Development Model page, and we'll put that in the chat room. And then you also see the links to their interviews that they did with us, the links to their site, and so forth. All right, we have a couple of announcements. This coming Minada, which is Saturday, November 28th, we will be just outside of Rochester, New York, doing a presentation in Webster, New York, on Kudu, the Akhan ancestral religion born of the blood circles of Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, Africans in North America, based on our book, Kudu People, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut in North America, Akhan, custodians of Kudu from ancient Kudu, Ndunu land, Khanit, Nubia. So we're going to be doing a presentation on that publication in Webster, New York, just outside of Rochester, New York, on November 28th. We did an event notification for that on Facebook, as well as on the NHOMA site, so you can check that out. And we look forward to connecting in Rochester, in the Rochester region. Of course, it is a free event. We do not charge admissions fees for our event, and we will be giving away a free copy of the book, that particular book, to all attendees of the event. And this is what we endeavor to do at all of our events. We just had an event this past weekend, but before we get to that, also in Hartford, Connecticut, we will be doing a presentation on the Hoodoo People publication as well. We will be putting out an event notification for that later this evening, and we'll be sending that out on the NHOMA site on Facebook and other social media. We just came back from the Atlanta area. We did a presentation this past Sunday on November 22nd on the Hoodoo People book as well. We had a great exchange. The community came out, the Oman, the nation, Odwiraman, purified nation, people came out. We had a great exchange of information, experiences, and networking and so forth. People really appreciated the presentation. We were able to give away a free copy of one of our books to everyone who came out to the presentation as well. So it was a great interchange, and we look forward to returning to the Georgia region because we will be back. Of course, we did that presentation on that one publication as well as a great question and answer session. But of course, we have 17 books out, and we have more coming out, and we look forward to returning to these various regions as well as going to new regions as well to share this information and interact face-to-face in person with the Oman, the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit community. So, upcoming Friday, Ptah, November 27th, we'll be in Hartford, Connecticut. The event notification coming out later tonight. Minida, this Saturday, November 28th, will be just outside of Rochester, New York, and Webster, New York, at 7:30 p.m. And that event notification has already been put out on the various social media sites that we have. Only other announcement, we do have, and we'll talk about this later as well, we have 17 books that we have published. We have more publications coming out. We're going to be releasing a publication based on the 5-part series that we did here on Blog Talk Radio, the Zep Tepi, for the first time, the creation of the world, talking about the different aspects of the unfolding of creation as manifest in the cosmology of our ancestresses and ancestors in ancient Khanit, Nubia and Kamit. And of course, that same cosmology is manifest in the various cultures wherever our people are found. So when you talk about the cosmology of quote-unquote Kimenu, of misnomer Hermopolis, cosmology of Anu, so-called Heliopolis, cosmology of Ta'apet, so-called thieves, and the connections between that, as well as ancient, Napata, so-called Nubia, Khanit, the ancient cosmology. These are the unfolding of different phases of the creative power, the development of creative power in creation. These are not separate or conflicting cosmologies. That is nonsense. So whenever people talk about, and we also talk about the Min-Nefer cosmology, dealing with Ptah and so forth. So when people talk about there were conflicting cosmologies in ancient Kemet and one cosmology was, dominated the other, that's when you know Negroes don't know what they're talking about. Each one of these different quote-unquote cosmologies are all part of a whole. They're different phases of the unfolding of the creative process. We did a 5-part series on that on Blog Talk. We're going to publish that information in the form of a publication. If you would like to pre-order that publication, it'll be a $10 publication. If you'd like to pre-order that publication, you can go to the website now, the NHOMA page on our website. We'll put the link in the chat room. On the NHOMA page, the publications page, you will see all 17 of our books. The ebook versions of all of our books are free, so each one of the 17 book covers you will see. You click on those, you can download the book immediately. We also have the softcover versions we publish ourselves and print ourselves in-house on our own printers in color. You can purchase those. They range between $8 and $11. And then we also have discounts, 30% off for any order of 10 books or more, 20% off for the first 5 books. So we'll get into some detail about that. But if you'd like to pre-order the Tepi book that will be coming out within a few weeks, you can do that through the donation button on the website, on the NHOMA page, and we'll go back in some detail about that later on in the broadcast. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because this is one of the ways that we are able to offer our presentations in different cities for free. So we do not charge admission fees. Everybody, our people, are only invited, of course, and only allowed to, enter into our presentation. But there are no admissions fees, and we do not charge a speaker's fee to organizers of our events in different cities. So one of the ways that the only way we're able to actually engage that process and give away a free copy of one of our softcover books to everyone who comes out is through the support of the community. So if you support the work that we are doing, many people like the publications we have and the broadcasts and so forth. Of course, we cover those costs for the station, the radio broadcast, as well as the giving away the free books and so forth. We've given away now nearly 600 copies, softcover versions of our books to the different places that we have gone, different cities we have gone to the community. So, of course, the ebook versions are free and people download the ebook versions on a regular basis. But then when we go to different cities, we give away the softcover versions. We're almost at about 600 that we've given away over the past number of presentations in different cities. So we want to keep that going. The way we keep that going, the only way is when we receive support through public people purchasing the softcover publication or making a donation on the website, and that assists us. Any donation of $15 or more, you have the option of receiving one or more of our books in return for your donation. So, and the link is there, right there, the NHOMA page link on the website. So we want to get into this information for tonight. The title of the broadcast, Ramifications of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Language in Ritual. So, it's a very important topic for a number of reasons. First and foremost, of course, is our ancestral languages are sacred. They resound the language of divinity. The sound vibrations are connected to the Obosom, the forces of nature, as we call them in Akhan, Orisha, in Yoruba, Vodou, in Fon and Efe, and Ntoro to the divinities, male and female in ancient Kemet and Khanat. We also use that term, Ntoro, in Akhan as well to identify that divinity as well. But the sound vibrations are connected to the nature of the divinities that manifest in creation. Different sound vibrations and collections of sound vibrations manifest through the spiritual vehicle of the divinities, just like different sound vibrations manifest through your physical vehicle, which we will get into. So first and foremost, sound is a representation and a reflection of the movement of energy in space through spirit bodies or physical bodies or some combination thereof. So sound is sacred, and our languages are connected to these sacred patterns of sound. That's key. But the ramifications that we're talking about of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral language in ritual, there are ramifications that run the gamut of our experience. But specifically with regard to our people here, especially when we have been separated from the continent forcibly, forced into the Western Hemisphere, then we lose a knowledge and become dispossessed of the knowledge on the surface of our ancestral languages. And so therefore, when people begin to get back involved in and returning to our ancestrally inherited birthright, our transcarnationally inherited birthright, our ancestral religious practice is transmitted to us individually, intergenerationally, and transcarnationally through successive reincarnations, through Bebra, through rebirth, reincarnation. So we have that capacity to attune to those ancestral languages, but on the surface, some of us have not been raised, of course, the vast majority of our people have not been raised in learning our ancestral language. So we get back involved in ancestral religion, reconnect with our ancestral birthright, our ancestral inheritance, transcarnational inheritance, and then the question often arises, is it important to utilize an ancestral language when you're engaged in ritual prayer, ritual song, libation, and so forth? And of course, we did a broadcast on the nature and function of the name. Renin and Reninit, the male and female divinities that govern the name. Of course, we show specifically and in detail why it is essential that we utilize our name, because of the collection of sound vibrations that our spirit bodies emanate. We replicate that with our vocal cords to enunciate our true names. And when we receive or transmit or process a discordant collection of vibrations, a European name, no matter what kind of European name it is, whether it's Spanish or English or French or whatever it is, that discordant collection of sound vibrations is a discordant projection of energy that we seek to incorporate, ingest, and there's no difference than physically ingesting something poisonous. It creates discordance within your body. A discordant collection of sound vibrations ingested, incorporated within the spirit body, creates disorder within the body, disorder within the mind, disorder within the perception. And therefore, you find people having misguided ideas, self-destructive ideas, misguided understanding of cosmology or their focus of what they should be engaged in on a regular basis. We talked about the name being a formula that forces the spirit and guides the spirit to align itself with the divine function that the person came into being to execute. Every time you hear the name or think your name or speak your name, your real name, that specific configuration of vibrations literally stimulates your spirit because it's wired into your spirit. It's a reflection of the nature of the structure of your spirit. Your spirit is structured just like your body has its own structure that's different from everybody else's. Your spirit body has a spiritual structure that's different from everybody else's, and it resounds a specific configuration of energy that nobody else's spirit body releases or resounds. And when you replicate that with your vocal cords and enunciate your true name, you stimulate your uniquely configured spirit body. And therefore, the energy you have been given by the Obosom to execute your divine function in the world is stimulated on a regular basis. But when you don't engage that process, then there's a problem. So we talked about that in our broadcast. We did another broadcast on Enne, the sounds of the Obosom, the nature of their birth name. Where does sound come from? How does the divinity come to manifest their specific name? Went into detail about that, and so forth. What we're talking about here is the ramification of utilizing ancestral language in ritual, the ramifications of those of us who were forced away from the continent, lost a knowledge of that language, and some seek to promote the idea that, well, you know, you can pray in English, there's nothing wrong with that, just like some people promote the idea that, you know, you can have an English name, or it doesn't matter, I use my cultural name around cultural people and my English name or government name around the crackers and so forth. We got into that part with the name in detail in the other broadcasts, but with regard to language, we want to get into that. What happens when we don't have our ancestral language? What takes place ritually when we're not utilizing our ancestral language in ritual? Even if we only know a few words, what takes place? Where does discordant energy come from when we engage that process? How do we remove that discordant energy and get ourselves in alignment? The misuse of language or the lack of use of proper language creates kinds of discordance that sometimes may seem imperceptible under the surface, but it's very similar to somebody smoking cigarettes for years. It's one thing if someone does heroin or something like that, or, you know, crack, and there's an immediate negative, obvious effect on the person's body, on their mind, and so forth, and people say, well, this is very, you know, disruptive and you know, deleterious to this person's condition. But if somebody's smoking cigarettes or cigars, and they don't seem like they're having a problem, and they smoke for a year or 2 years, 3 years, 25 years, 30 years, they're smoking, and they seem like they're all right. But then at some point, you know, they find out from the doctor that they have lung cancer, and then a year later they die. It's not because they developed lung cancer that particular year and they were clean for 30 years. Those toxins were developing that entire time. They accumulated to the point where their immune system fighting and getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker year after year after year, to the point where finally it was worn out and the cancer cells took over. So on a consistent basis, they are destroying their health incrementally every single day, year after year, until they get to that point. But they don't recognize that on the surface, except for every now and then they may feel sick or may feel weaker, they may feel more tired and so forth, but they dismiss that because they think, I'm all right. And the same thing is true. We do not utilize our proper names, as well as, which we've been into detail about, as well as when we don't use our proper languages, sound vibrations that resound divinity, when we're engaged in communication with the Obosom and with the NHOMA and NHOMA, with the deities and ancestors and ancestors. The reality is that when we project discordant vibrations, English language, Spanish and French and Portuguese and German and everything else that we've been forced to speak, when we project those discordant vibrations in the form of these perverse so-called languages, the Obosom do not listen to that, the Orisha don't listen to that, the Vodou don't listen to that. They attune to our spirits because they know we don't understand that we shouldn't be projecting these negative vibrations. But these negative vibrations, when we continuously hold on to them, begin to affect us negatively. They lock our spirits down mentally, our Adwini, our spirit, our mind. They lock that down because we have become, we've adhered to them. We've become locked into these fake languages. So let's get into the UBEN-HYENG The Ancestral Summons. We'll talk about the nature of names and language, and then we'll get into the ramifications of the use or non-use of these languages and show how to remedy that, and talk about some examples with regard to what people have experienced in their everyday lives ritually. Okay. So the specific piece, we're going to put the link in the chat room, the UBEN-HYENG from our book, UBEN-HYENG The Ancestral Summons. And that is one of our publications. Now let's put this in real quick. Want to make sure we got this in here. All right, so that's the publication. Put the link in the chat room. And that piece is like on page 20. On page 20 of the book. The pages are not numbered, but as you scroll down in the PDF, you can see on the side, page numbers. And this particular book is the only book that's like that, that are not numbered, and that was done for a specific purpose for this particular publication. All right, so the name of the section is Goddess Holds Your Name, God Has Your Language. So we're going to go through the information and examine each piece. Energy Fathers Movement. And recall, UBEN-HYENG, we got this information directly from our NHOMA, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors in the Obosom, making this book different from the other publications that we have. They were giving us this kind of information. Of course, we researched it, investigated it, and everything else. They gave us the information. We wrote the information down, and that's what the whole book is about. Energy Fathers Movement. This is the beginning of creation. Energy before movement contained all vibrations necessary for the coming into being of all things in a passive potency. Goddess, mother's energy. So the energy that fathers movement, as we say here, is the energy of Nun and Nunet, the primordial energy of creation, which will give birth to Ra and Ra'et. So energy fathers movement, new fathers Ra, Nunet, mothers Ra'et. That's the beginning of creation, talking about the creative power, Ra and Ra'et, coming out of the primordial energy. Energy before movement contained all vibrations necessary for the coming into being of all things in a passive potent mother's energy. So the great goddess Amenet, or Nyamewa, she mothers that primordial energy. Amen and Amenet are the great mother and father. They give birth to Khan, Kayet, Hehu, and Hehu, Nun and Nunet. Those, they become the primordial eight divinities, and Nun and Nunet give birth to Ra and Ra'et, the creator and creatress that come forth out of the darkness, manifest in the form of the first fire and light in creation. They're the spiritual force behind that. So, sound is truly primordial. We receive sound, we process sound, we reproduce sound. Goddess sustains our form specified sound. These sounds are our name, and that is the goddess, the Ntorot Rinimit, the divinity that governs name. All movement, vibrations, product, sound is merely an audible manifestation or revelation of energy, pre-existent energy. Is the word you speak not already known to you before you allow it to pass from your lips? Did the word not exist prior to your speaking it? Is the spoken word then not a manifestation, revelation of energy, vibration, which were pre-existent in your mind, spirit? Sound is truly primordial. Words in and of themselves are simply collections of vibrations. Collections of vibrations generate sound. That collection of vibrations, or quote-unquote words, that collection of energy was pre-existent in your spirit before you decided to enunciate the sound. That energy already exists. So when you speak words, you're simply giving verbiage to a pre-existent energy. And that pre-existent energy gives birth to the sound. Sound is primordial. And it comes from the movement of Ra and Ra'et, expanding and contracting throughout the black substance of space, creating the suns, moons, stars, the spiritual forms of all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, of course, as well as plant life, animal life, mineral life, and all of creation. So as they move through creation, they generate sound vibrations, no different than you grab a rope, swing it around in the air, it creates a whistling sound. When you pluck a string, a taut string like a guitar string, the movement, the vibration creates sound. When you cause the tuning fork to oscillate, the vibrations create sound. So Ra and Ra'et moving through creation, expanding and contracting, they're the first forces, male and female, that move and expand and contract in creation. They are the creator and creatress. They generate sound. That's the primordial sound. As spirit vibrates through any form, talking about Ra and Ra'et, sounds are emitted. We notice the different sounds produced as air vibrates through musical instruments of various shapes. Every musical instrument speaks. Its specific dialect is determined by its form, its use. This is language. So now we're talking about what language really is from a spiritual perspective, from a grounded perspective, from a primordial perspective. Different sounds produced as air vibrates through musical instruments of various shapes. So if you blow through a trumpet, a certain collection of sound vibrations comes forward. If you put that down and blow through a tuba, the sound that emanates is different than that from the trumpet. The same source of air, which is you, but because it's moving through a different form, the sound is different. You put that down and pick up a trombone, same source of air, which is you, but the sound that emanates from the trombone is different than what emanates from the tuba, which is different than what emanates from the trumpet. Because of the different shapes or forms that the energy or the air is moving through, there's a different collection of sound vibrations that emanates from the instrument of various shapes. So we say every musical instrument speaks. Its specific dialect is determined by its form and, of course, its use. This is language. Can we not perceive different sound groupings as spirit vibrates through humans of various spirit energetic configurations? Humans talking about Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people only. Does your configuration not emit your true name? Do you not have a language, a primordial language? So let's go back. Just like the instruments, we have our physical bodies. No one looks exactly like us, unless you have an identical twin. And even with that, there's a slight difference. But every one of us has a unique form, a unique shape. Even if you're children of the same parent, you're not identical. So your shape is different physiologically, physically, from the shape of your brothers and sisters, as well as every other person on earth and every other person that has ever existed in the past, because nobody in the past had your exact parents with the same exact DNA, born at the same time, and so forth. Nobody has ever had your exact form. So your form is unique. Your structure is unique. And when the life force energy of Ra and Ra'et circulates through your unique form, then there's a unique collection of sound vibrations that is constantly emanating from you just by virtue of the fact that you're alive and breathing and life force energy is circulating through you. When we attune to that specific, unique configuration of sound vibrations emanating from our specific, unique form, and we replicate that with the vocal cords, that is our actual name. So you're born with the name. Now, we say, does your configuration not emit your true name? Of course, yes, it does. Do you not have a language? That's the key we're getting to tonight. A primordial language, a language rooted in the product of energy vibrating through your genetic form. And we just showed that, yes, we do have a language. The specific, what's emanating from you is different from what's emanating from someone standing next to you. So the sound vibrations emanating from you, and when you project and you speak and you operate and when you move, every time you move, you're projecting energy. Sound vibrations are emanating from that energy. So you have a unique set of sound vibrations, and as you move and interact and engage, then those sound vibrations are strung together, and that becomes your words, your collection of words, or your language. And you have a specific dialect rooted, as we say, in the product of energy vibrating through your genetic form. What then is your dialect? Does the region in which you live not have an effect on your physiology? Should then your natural dialect of the primal language not be a result of your migration to a different region? You have a name, you have a language, Goddess has written the dialect into your very nature. So let's go back to that point. When people live in a hot region, people move slightly slower. In a hot region, people are more laid back, quote unquote, and that's just shown physically and in the culture, but even the speech is more laid back. And people have like a so-called southern drawl. People move a little bit slower, they're more laid back, they're more, quote unquote, patient, so to speak. People live in a cold region, like a cold region of North America and so forth. People move faster to continue to generate heat, to maintain their, physiological balance and so forth. They move faster, they speak faster, things are moving quicker and so forth. They even can have a more acerbic speech pattern, or acidic to a certain extent, depending on the people. But they move faster, they speak faster, and their speech is different from the people in the slower moving region, the harder moving regions with the, southern drawl and so forth. Those differences in energy affect the way people speak, it affects the way they pronounce words, it affects their enunciation, it affects the way they approach language. That affects the dialect. So one dialect, the way people speak in this area, where he has a southern dialect. She has a northeastern dialect. She has a western dialect. Not only in America, but wherever we are in the world. You have people of the same ethnic group. For example, the Akhan people, you have different Akhan subgroups. You have the Tree language of the Akhan. You have the Asante Tree, the Asante dialect. You have the Fanti Tree, the Fanti dialect. Akwamu Tree, the Akwamu dialect. They speak the same words, but there's a certain changes in the way they are pronounced based on the dialect, dialectical variation. People move to different regions. They're encountering the Obosom, the forces in nature of those different regions. So you move to a riverine area, the energy in the riverine area connected to the Obosom of the river is slightly different than when you move to a desert area, or move to an equatorial forest area, or move to a mountainous region, or move to a savanna region, and so forth. So the different Obosom forces in nature connected to those regions affect the energy of those regions. In the hot, fiery regions of the desert, people have a more hot, fiery energy that manifests in their phenotype, that manifests in their physiological structure, that manifests in the way they speak, the way they announce their words or enunciate their words. People move into a cool river region, which is more fertile and less hot and so forth, and less fiery. The people have more cool disposition. The way they speak is affected by that, and their dialect is slightly the same thing in the mountainous region or a forest region or a savanna region and so forth, the different energy output of these different regions based on the Obosom moving through these regions, as well as Nsamanfo, ancestral spirits who still exist and populate these regions. That affects the way the people speak. It affects your physiology, but it also affects the construction of your spirit and the way you express yourself. So your dialect of the primordial language, we all came from the same space. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people created by Ra and Ra'et. But then we began to migrate away from the centerpiece in Afuraka, Afuraikai, to migrate to different parts of Afuraka, Afuraikai, as well as different parts of the world. We move to different regions. We get affected by the Obosom of those different regions. We get possessed by these Obosom. They affect our blood circle. People from those regions possessed by that Obosom are connected to that divinity with regards to their blood circle, and they're connected through a patriclan relationship or a matriclan relationship to those Obosom, those divinities. This takes place wherever we migrate, because that also affects our speech patterns, our dialect. So that primordial language that we all shared, we migrated away to different parts, and over time and through experiences and incorporating divinities in the local regions that we migrated to and settled in and became connected to and indigenized to. We talked about indigenization first can only happen with our people. And the reason for that is because the only way you become indigenized to a region is not simply migrating there and living there for thousands of years, but you migrate to a region. Some people in the area become possessed by the Obosom of the region, and the energy of that Obosom is moving through the blood circle of those people. It affects all the cells in their body, including the sperm and ovum. So when they have children, the body of that child is conceived, is resonating at the frequency of the Obosom that possessed the people for the first time. And so that child is the firstborn that is indigenous to the region. Yes, they are born on the land, but their body itself resonates at the frequency of the Obosom that possessed their people. And then over generations, the people are connecting with these Obosom of the region, passing on that genetic material that is animated by the Obosom's energy, the Obosom of the region's energy, and therefore those people have become indigenized, literally tied to the land because they got possessed by the Obosom of the land. The whites and their offspring do not get possessed by the divinities because they do not possess spirits of disorder. So therefore, no cracker can be indigenous to any land. All they can do is migrate and be invaded. But the Obosom, the deities of the quote-unquote Mississippi River or, some other river in America, that spirit will never possess some white Asians who later call themselves Native Americans. They will not possess the whites and their offspring, period. So therefore, they can live somewhere for a few thousand years and never become indigenized to the land. But our people can become indigenized in the same generation because they get possessed by the Obosom of the land. So only we can be indigenized. So we talk about that, but when we talk about moving to different regions, that affects our speech, affects our physical bodies, affects our speech by extension, and therefore the primordial, primal language that we share becomes nuanced based on the places that we migrated, and then later based on our experience, further nuanced based on our experience. So that dialect is written into our nature, written into our migration patterns and so forth, and our association with the Obosom of different regions. Now, we go further in the document. Hold on one second. Okay, so the ancestral spirits recognize the dialect of the primordial language they spoke. They recognize it when you call their name in their dialect during libation. They recognize it when you provoke dialogue in their dialect through evocation. Their dialect nourishes them, for it is descendant through Afuraka, Afuraikai, from the primordial God language, which is a tonal language. Tonal languages give different meanings for the same word, based on the way in which the word is pronounced and what tone is spoken. Different tones are different vibrations. Different vibrations yield different meanings. Is this not of God? And we're talking about, in this particular piece, talking about the tonal language, talking about Tahuti, the divinity Tahuti. Are the different phases of creative power not reflective of different rates of vibration, thus yielding different tones, values, meaning? Deity. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit language resounds divinity. So when we talk about different tones and different meaning in language, and going back to the ancestral spirits, recognize the dialect of the primordial language they spoke. Some people who are pseudo-academic, who have no understanding of culture, but they may have a PhD in African studies or something like that, or they're a black nationalist or Pan-Africanist, and they believe that they have some knowledge of culture because they've read about history or anthropology or have visited the continent or visited Kemet, where they're talking about, studying language and things like that, but they really have no understanding of what they're talking about. They'll try to say things like, well, it's important for, people speaking languages, speaking their ancestral language as part of a community, but once you get outside of community, then the language really doesn't mean anything because it only has meaning in the context of community. So it doesn't make sense for black people to speak an ancestral language because you're not part of that community anymore. You're not living on the continent, living in a specific village where all the cultural motifs and expressions and things like that are going on that make the language important and valuable, and all the nuances in the language based on the way the people live. You don't live like that anymore, so there's no need to speak the language. It's just, window dressing on culture. And of course, they have no idea what they're talking about at all. That's Eurocentric nonsense because they don't understand what culture really is. The ancestresses and ancestors are nourished by the dialect, the ancestral language that they once spoke. And when you speak that specific collection of vibrations that's connected to their clan, those vibrations stimulate their spirit body and it provokes their energy in a positive capacity. And then that provocation yields a transmission of energy to you when they respond back to you. So it nourishes them. Projecting the discordant language of English or French or Spanish or Portuguese or something like that, that's just nothing more than a discordant collection of vibrations that are not reflective of the energy streaming from the Obosom, the forces in nature, or the Nanano and Sama. So you're just throwing out balls of garbage, basically, when you're speaking English and projecting that to the Obosom, which they reject, and projecting it to the Nanano and Sama, which they reject. So you're just throwing garbage towards the forces in nature. You're desecrating, in a sense, in reality, that energy, but they're repelling it at the same time. So when you speak your traditional dialect that stimulates their spirit body and they respond, it also stimulates your own spirit body. Because as we said, your primal language manifests a primordial dialect. It's born and written within you. It's written within you based on your experiences coming from a specific master clan or patriclan, having a trustery of having moved in certain regions, becoming connected with certain Obosom. That changes your physiology, and the manner in which you express yourself is connected to that energy, connected to the patriclan deity, the master clan divinity, as we say, the Obosom, Obosom, and Akhan, moving through these different regions, affecting our physiology, affecting the way the spirits move through us, and then when we speak, it's a reflection of our experience in nature, in creation, in different regions of our Earth Mother. So, when that takes place within us, and then we speak that language, that harmonious collection of sound vibrations emanating from the language, it's not just like, oh, when I hear an African language, it really sounds nice, I just like the way it sounds. It's not simply because it sounds good and harmonious. It's because it's written into you. When you attune to your own spirit body, there are sounds emanating from you right now, a specific configuration. And the primordial dialect that's written within you is expressed through the emanation of sound emanating from your spirit body, from your physical instrument. The one who is blowing through your instrument, the life force energy moving through your instrument is Ra and Ra'et, through your spirit, through your Ba, your Ba'et, your divine living energy. They're blowing, quote unquote, through your instrument, and the sounds emanating from your instrument consistently are unique, and they are a reflection of that primordial dialect that's written within you. So when you speak the ancestral language, it not only stimulates the Nsamanfo who spoke that language and of course their memory of that, but also their spirit bodies. When the sound vibration hits their spirit body, it also provokes positively the energy of the Obosom, because ultimately the language comes from the Obosom, but it also stimulates your own spirit body just to speak the language out loud to yourself, or to listen to it or recall the language and how it sounds. It literally stimulates your own spirit body. So whatever fool is talking about speaking ancestral languages doesn't mean anything outside of the context of living as a part of a community, has no knowledge of culture at all. Even further, they don't even recognize the reality that we're always operating within the context of a community, because our ancestors and ancestors, the Nanano and Samanfo, are our community that are living and connected to us. And we have Samanfo that are assigned to us. So even if nobody we know anywhere in our physical community can speak an ancestral language, we're still part of a community, because we're part of the Samanfo community. The ancestral community, they still walk with us and connect with us. So when we speak the ancestral language, it stimulates them positively, and the response that we receive is a harmonious response. When we speak the ancestral language, project those sound vibrations to the Obosom, the forces in nature that are connected to us, and they have a positive response that is provoked, and they return a response to us that is harmonious. When we speak the ancestral language of our clan, or even attune to it or recall it in our own spirit, our own mind, those sound vibrations of the ancestral language stimulate the different centers within our spirit body. Just to hear the language, it's no different than drinking some green juice to stimulate your body, to fuel your body. It doesn't matter if everybody else is drinking green juice or not. If you put it in your system, it impacts you in a positive way, physically. So you take the ancestral language in your system, including, of course, your ancestral name every time you hear it, speak it, or recall it. Inside your own spirit, remember it. Those sound vibrations stimulate you or fuel you and nourish you and cleanse you, rejuvenate you in a positive capacity. So that's the value of language. And then we talk about the different tones having different meanings. You have terms like papa, low, high. Papa means father in the Akhan language. Papa, high to low, means good in the Akhan language. And pa means to pat. So it's the same term, but papa, low, high, and papa, high, low, and pa, which is straight. 3 different meanings based on the difference in sound vibration, difference in tone. Same thing when you have different tones, different sound, A tone, B tone, and so forth. The different tones, different rates of vibration. Different rates of vibration generate different color. They also stimulate different aspects of your body and spirit body in different ways. So different tones yield different meanings with regard to energy. Different tones in language yield different meanings in our languages, because our languages are tonal. They resound divinity. They're connected to creation, connected to reality. And that's all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit languages, no matter where we exist in the world. And so we say you are connected genetically to the ancestral spirit. If the dialect they spoke nourishes and energizes them, should it not nourish and energize you as their descendant, their incarnation? You have a right and responsibility to employ the dialect that was written in you, the name resonating as you. Goddess has a name, God has a language. We're talking about Renanit and Tahuti in this particular capacity. Speak them if you are a goddess god, Nyame wa Nyame. Proper name and language are energetic linked to spirit. So that's the philosophical foundation for the value of language and the necessity of utilizing our ancestral language. Now, of course, we talked about how our people were dispossessed of our language once we were forced into the Western Hemisphere, dispossessed of the language on the surface, consciously. Can we ever really be dispossessed of our ancestral language? Absolutely not. Because within our spirit, our Sumsum, everything that has ever taken place with regard to us in every incarnation is wired within our spirit bodies. It's accessible. Just like all the things that have taken place in your life are in your brain, in your memory, and so forth. you do have the capacity to recall these various things, and ritual practice allows us to do so. Everything that's taken place in previous lifetimes is written within our spirit, inscribed the Sum, the spirit. That takes place. So we have the capacity to attune to our ancestral language. So when we begin to hear the specific language that we spoke, the specific dialect that we spoke, we may not know what group we come from, but then we come in contact with someone, come across someone, or put into the path of someone by the Nsamako, or the Nsamako put someone in our path, and we communicate with them and they speak that ancestral language. It stimulates something within our spirit. It stimulates that aspect of our spirit that has that information. And we resonate with it because that's the language we used to speak. Our memory, it kicks in. Our ancestral memory kicks in. We begin to recognize, wait a minute, this is something familiar about this language. So we can never really lose that. But even on the surface, when some of our people have lost that information, become dispossessed of that on the surface, and then we begin to get involved in ancestral religion. We learn that Jesus is a fictional cartoon character who never existed of any race or in any form whatsoever. Jesus, Yeshua, Esau, Yeshua ben Pandera, so forth, all fiction. Not black, not white, not existent, period. We recognize that Muhammad and Moses and Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael and Solomon and Sheba and Menelik and all of these characters, Buddha, Brahman, Allah, Yahweh, are fictional cartoon characters who have never existed, not in any form nor of any race whatsoever, manufactured by the whites and their offspring to control the minds of our people, whether they blacken up these fake cartoon characters or not. They never exist. So we reject that nonsense. People study the Kukutuntum, the ancestral jurisdiction, the publication that we published, proving that these characters never existed and how they were manufactured, the titles of the deities of ancient Kemet, and certain aspects of their cosmology. So you learn about that, and you reject all of that pseudo-religious nonsense, and you want to return to your ancestral religious practice. And then some people tell you, well, it's okay, you don't understand your language now. You don't even know what language your people used to speak. So you can speak English because the deities listen to that. They understand what you're doing, and there's nothing wrong with praying in English. And, of course, that's nonsense. And then people become more locked in, more enamored with this perverse language, and more have a greater propensity to make even further excuses about why they should hold on to their European name that were forced on us as people, and why they should hold on to this European language. Every time you make an excuse, you further embolden yourself in a negative capacity, further ally yourself, further force yourself like someone addicted to a drug. Every time you take the drug, you maintain that addiction. Every time you continuously take that into your system and make excuses about why you should not stop, then you perpetuate that addiction. At some point, you have to cut it off. You have to stop feeding the addiction, and then you have to heal yourself. When you're constantly making excuses, then you constantly feed that addiction. Because while you're feeding that addiction, the whites and their offspring are controlling your spirit, your mind in some capacity. Or else you would not be making up excuses about why it's unnecessary to change your name or why it's unnecessary to speak an ancestral language. You're just going to speak English. Number one, the Obosom don't listen to English or any other European language. Just like someone can just garble a bunch of nonsense, like if someone was drunk and they were just talking with a slurred speech and just babbling some misinformation, or if they were on drugs and just babbling. That's what's happening when we're speaking English and projecting those perverse vibrations to spirits of order. The Obosom are the embodiments of divine order and creation. They do not receive disorder, nor do they transmit it. So when you project disorder to the Obosom in any way, it's repelled. It's like two magnets on the table, with the same polarities facing. You put one near the other one, it repels it without touch. If you project disorder in any way, disordered thoughts, intentions, or actions, and you project that disordered energy in any way, lust or malice or whatever it is, or these, European languages and so forth, that energy is discordant. So when you project that towards the Obosom, they repel that, so it never gets to them because they repel it. You project that towards the Nananom Nsamako, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. They repel that negative energy as well. So it simply is returned right back to you. When you speak to any Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit person, our people, just in general, their cry repels those negative vibrations as well. And when you speak the language yourself and try to incorporate it in a ritual, you feel a discordance or some disalignment because you know, and you begin to question, oh, should I be speaking English at the shrine or should I? Because you know your cry is directing you not to engage that process because it's further enslaving you to these white cultural practices as opposed to freeing you from that nonsense. So you feel that disconcerted energy because you know there's a problem. So, yeah, Obosom don't listen to that. The Nsamafo don't listen to it. Of course, Inyame don't listen to it. If you don't know the language that is part of your primordial dialect and so forth, the Nsamafo, what they're really listening to or attuning to when you go to them, they're not listening to you babble in English. They're attuning to what you're generating even before you speak the English word. If you're having a problem with an illness and you're in pain and you're trying to figure out what's going on and you go to the Nsamafo, they can feel that projection of pain that you register within your spirit and project out to them. They're responding to that. They see what you're going through. They recognize what you're going through. They know why you're coming to the shrine. Even before you open your mouth, they're already responding to the energetic output coming from. When you are about, as we said earlier, before you speak some words, if you have an idea and you're going to convey it to someone, you're about to open your mouth about saying, for example, so-and-so just took the train to this specific place. Before you utter those words, you know what event took place. You can see or image the train and the person and the location and everything else. Now you have to find English verbiage, English words that the actual event that took place. As the event was taking place, there weren't a bunch of English words jumping out of the train and the person's body to talk about what's taking place. The event took place. Things took place. People were engaging life. But then you're finding the proper English words that reflect what took place and the energy exchanges that gave birth to the event. Before you find the English words that reflect what took place, the event that you're trying to describe already happened and it's within your spirit and you can feel it. Anytime you have any yearning or desire or want to communicate and so forth and want to know something, all those different things, the Obosom and Nsamafo attune to that. Before you wrap English words around it, they're already attuning to it and they will respond accordingly. When you wrap English words around what you're feeling and then project those English words out to describe an energetic experience, the Obosom and Nsamafo discards the English words that you projected them and repel that and just attune to your spirit. So they were never listening to your English prayers all along. They were attuning to your spirit, so you can easily just drop the use of the English because it's not connecting with anybody. All it's doing, therefore, when you know it's not connecting with the Obosom, you know they're not paying attention to that. And the Nsamafo are not paying attention to that, then there's no reason to use it. So if you continue to use it, then it's just a manifestation of the fact that you've been conditioned by the whites and their offspring to value their perverse languages, looking for an excuse to continue to use it. And that further enslaves your mind so that you can make excuses. So that's what's taking place. And many people who are promoting that nonsense, they're enslaved by white culture and they don't want to admit that. So they come up with various rationalizations about why it's necessary to continue to use English. Now, when you get back to your ancestral language, if you don't know what language you speak, it's no different than a baby. And we've used that example before. A baby crying, before they learn how to speak, they have desires, they have needs, they have wants, they have experiences, they have, sensations. So they have to learn how to communicate that. But it's before they learn how to speak, what they do is cry or they make sound. Now, when a mother and a father are maybe a new mother or father, they don't know the difference between one cry and the other. So when the baby's crying, the baby's just crying. But after a while, they attune to the spirit of the child. They attune to the sound vibrations emanating from the child. and they can determine the differences of the nuanced cry. One cry means that the baby is in pain, or maybe has gas or something like that, colic or something like that. Another cry means that they need to be changed. Another cry means that they're sleepy. Another cry means that they're hungry. Somebody outside of the house, they may not know the difference. They just know, oh, the baby is crying again. But when you're a parent and you're attuned to the child, the differences between the cries you can attune to, and you know right away, oh, the baby is hungry. Oh, the baby needs to be changed. Oh, the baby is tired. Oh, the baby is not feeling well, and so forth. So, in the same fashion, the Obosom know, even though we can't speak yet, our mouths, quote unquote, have been taken from us. And when we go through the process, the opening of the mouth and eyes and so forth, as it's shown in the text of Kamit, give to me my mouth so that I can speak with it. The mouth is returned so we can speak proper words and so forth. But before that takes place, we're like the baby who prays or quote unquote cries out to enunciate to the Obosom, to the Supreme Being, to the Nsamafo, that we need some assistance. And they can attune to our spirit to determine, are we wet, are we in pain, are we, tired, or do we need something different? And the Obosom attune to what our desires are, what our needs are, and they attend to those needs based on their function in creation. This is what's taking place. So when you understand that reality, you remove the English language so you don't continuously enslave your spirit to value that perversity, and you only focus on your ancestral language. If you don't know what that ancestral language is yet, simply projecting, when you go to the shrine, pouring libation and sitting in front of the shrine and expressing the energy of your spirit to the Obosom, visualizing what you want or the scenarios that are taking place and what you need to know. That's communication in and of itself. They will direct you as to what ancestral clan you came from. And when they direct you as to which ancestral clan you came from, then you learn about that clan and begin to incorporate the basics of the language. What is the name of the great mother and great father? What do they call the deity? What do they call the ancestresses and ancestors in the language? So in Akhan, for example, Nyame was the great mother, Nyame is the great father. The deities are called the Obosom. The ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated are the Nananom Nsamafo. The first time we learned about our ancestral language, our prayer was like 3 lines, just Nyame wa Nyame, the Obosom, and Nsamafo. And as we learned more language, then we included that in ritual prayer. But even before you get to that, even before you get to speaking, before you learn that, just by virtue of the fact that you're born in that ancestral language is written into your nature, as soon as you sit down and engage in ritual, you're constantly projecting emanations from your spirit. Your body is already speaking. It's already projecting to the Obosom and to the Nsamafo and to Nyame wa Nyame. So you don't want to cut off that speech. You don't want to pervert that speech. You don't want to make it pervert. You want it to be pure. Purification, as we said, Jada, purification operationalizes Nanasom. It operationalizes our ritual incorporation of law and ritual restoration of divine balance. When you incorporate law, you fuel yourself. When you restore balance through the rejection of disorder, then you purify yourself, you cleanse yourself, you protect yourself. So through divine hate or rejection, we reject the fake language, trying to incorporate that in ritual. And we simply purge ourselves of that perversity, and the only thing left is the pure nature, spirit body's configuration, and the energy emanating from that. And therefore, we can sit in front of the shrine and project our spirit energy to the Nsamafo and Obosom, uncut without these filters. And when they communicate to us who we are ancestrally, then we begin to learn that language and incorporate that within our ritual practice. Just like in different traditions, certain children that are born with so-called birth defects, they fall under the protection of the Nananom Nsamafo and the protection of specific Obosom. No different than here. So that concept that children who are born with birth defects are protected by the Obosom and Nsamafo, even physically. If a child is born with a birth defect in our community, then the community protects them. Someone makes fun of them. The community lashes out, and they protect them. They make sure they have everything they need, make sure they're protected because they're more vulnerable than the average child. In the same capacity, when we have, some vulnerability, when we are born deaf and born mute because we come in to this culture, separated from the continent. We can't speak the ancestral language on the surface. We don't know, and we can't hear it, so to speak, on the surface. We're quote-unquote deaf and mute or are born into this culture with a birth defect, so to speak, that we have extra protection. It's Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the West, extra protection from the Obosom, extra protection from the Enslavement. They want to attend to us and make sure we are protected, but at the same time we incorporate who we are, learn our ancestral language, and begin to incorporate that. So they make sure they attune to who we are. No different than the child that has a birth defect, they have that extra protection to make sure they can function in the community in a harmonious capacity. So they will attend to us, and they will show us. They want to show us, and it's part of their obligation to show us what clan we come from. And once we learn that information, we begin to incorporate that. So let's get on the phone line. We saw that we had a couple of comments in the chat room. If you have a question or a comment on the phone line, you can hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. And we're going to go through the chat room real quick. And in the meantime, for the individuals who came on a little bit later, there are a few technical difficulties with Blog Talk when we first got on, and it was hard for people to, the chat room actually was not opening up. And it was hard for people to get on the phone line, but then after a while, the phone line started, it cleared out and people were able to get on the phone line. So the announcements we made were we will be on Ptah Friday, November 27th. We will be Hartford, Connecticut. We're going to send out an event notification for that later tonight. And in Minnedah this Saturday, we will be just outside of Rochester, New York, doing a presentation on Hoodoo, the Akhan ancestral religion, born of the blood circles of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in North America, based on our book, Hoodoo People. That presentation will be at 7:30 p.m. In Webster, New York, just outside of Rochester. We did an event notification for that. Look on the Facebook page, our NHOMA site, for information about that. Also on our Hoodoo page on our regular website, odwirafo.com/hoodoo.html. And you'll see the details for that. Of course, it's a free event, open to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people only. We will be giving away a free copy of the Hoodoo People books to everyone who attends, and we always do that at our different events. If you'd like to support the work that we are doing, you can go directly to our publications page. You can go to the publications page now if you'd like to support our work. We've given away, as we said earlier, nearly 600 copies of the soft cover versions of our books to the different cities that we've gone into. Every time we do a presentation, we give away a free copy of our book to one of our books to everyone who attends the event. Recently, we've been in D.C. with our Hoodoo Mind Festival, also the Cocoa Boat Movement. We were in Alabama a couple of weeks ago. We did our presentation in Atlanta just 2 days ago. So everywhere we have gone, we've given away a free copy of one of our books to everyone who attends. Plus, the ebook versions of all 17 of our books are already free online anyway. So people download those. But then the softcover versions we do sell. They range between $8 and $11, but we do give away a free copy, and we're almost at 600 giveaways so far. We want to continue that process. So if you support the work that we do, please go to the NHOMA page on the website. You can go to that link now. We're actually in the midst of raising some funds to finish up with the travel expenses for this trip to Connecticut and New York this weekend. So if you'd like to support the work that we're doing, any purchase of our books, softcover books, one or more books, will assist us in that effort, as well as any donation of $15 or more. We will, you have the option of receiving one or more of our softcover books being shipped to you, any order, one book or more. So whether it's a donation, any donation of $15 or more, you can receive one or more of our books. And of course, our book, 10 books or more, is automatically 30% off. The first 5 books is a 20% off piece as well. So the first 5 books in our series is 20% off. That's $40 for the first 5 books. We did a short video on that, talking about that. NHOMA Enum, the first 5 books, which is The Ancestral Jurisdiction. We talk about the cosmological foundation of creation, as well as the fictional characters of the Bible, Quran, Talmud, never existing, Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Abraham, Isaac, Buddha, all of these characters. That book is the first, number one in the first 5 books. Number 2 is the UBEN-HYENG The Ancestral Summons, which we read from tonight. That is part of that first 5 books. Afurakani, the origin of the term Africa, will prove conclusively that the term Africa comes from Afurakani. We show that in the Medusa, the hieroglyph, we're the first to publish that information of any writers, black or white. Modern and achieved divine law and divine hate. The 2 halves of divine order is divine law or love and divine hate. Mara Nechi. We're going into detail about the nature of divine law and divine hate and how you don't understand divine order if you don't understand those 2 expansive and contractive poles. They're governed by Ma'a and Ma'at, the male and female forces of divine law, and Herubesuden Sechima, the male and female forces of divine hate. Hate is divine. There are deities of hate, male and female, just like there are deities of law or love. So we're going into detail about that. And we have the Okra complex, the soul of Akhan, the nature of the soul, the divine consciousness, which is a deity dwelling in the head region of Afuraitkaitnut people only, called the Ka, or the Khanit and Kamit, the Kra, and Krawa and Akhan, the Ori, Inu, and Yoruba, Selu, Fido, and Vodon. The Kra is a divinity, sits in the head region of the spirit body and pulls you in your head region towards thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with divine order every moment of every day. So spirituality is about aligning with that divinity that dwells in your head region so you can communicate with that force in nature in a profound fashion. That book deals with that in detail. So those first 5 books are 20% off. It's $40 for the first 5. Then any order of 10 books or more is automatically 30% off. But then any order of just 1 or more books, our books only range between $8 and $11. So please support that work, and it allows us to do these free book giveaways and connect this information to our community. Okay, in the chat room, there's a question. So how about keeping my name from Achiwadiefo? And hold on one second, I want to make sure we didn't miss what's this first part to that. All right. How about keeping my name from Achiwadiefo? Achiwadiefo, the Akhan term we use for spirits of disorder, the whites and offspring, divinely hated. Chi means to hate, of course. Idea means things, objects, deeds, and entities. So Achiwadiefo are the whites and offspring, the spirits of disorder, those who are divinely hated, rejected by the supreme being, the deities, ancestral spirits, and so forth. So she said, how about keeping my name from the Achiwadiefo? They can't really affect me by enunciating my name, right? So, right, they can't affect you by enunciating your name. And I'm assuming you're talking about your actual ancestral name. They can't affect you by, if they speak your name, if they said Kwesi and so forth. Their weak vibrations cannot negatively affect me by them speaking my name. However, when you hold on to a European name, Eurocentric name, and so forth, that is a configuration of discordant energy. So when you seek to ingest that configuration, whether you speak it yourself, or you listen to it yourself, or recall it yourself, or identify yourself, respond in a way that you identify yourself with that configuration of sound vibrations that is discordant, receiving a set of discordant vibrations, discordant energy, which creates discordance within your spirit body. No different than taking in some food that you shouldn't take in. It causes a problem in your physical body. If you keep taking it in anyway, it's like someone can be obese for years because they keep ingesting things that they do not need to ingest. They're constantly, chronically obese, and that also affects someone spiritually. If you're constantly engaged in disorder, then you make excuses for disorder, and therefore it's more difficult to align with order on a consistent basis because you have conditioned yourself to accept disorder. You also weaken your spiritual immunity, cause that spiritual immunity to be compromised and so forth, just like someone who's constantly eating the wrong foods and not getting enough sleep. that they compromise their physical immunity and they're more susceptible to be affected by negative bacteria. And we maintain these European labels, so-called names and so forth. We lower our spiritual immunity because we are constantly rejecting order and embracing disorder. When you embrace disorder consistently, you weaken your spiritual immunity. Your spiritual immunity is founded in the reality of order. Immunity is about the preservation of order. So if you're not preserving order, you're constantly circumventing the divine order, then you're weakening your spiritual immunity. And then you make yourself more susceptible to the thoughts, projections, suggestions, provocations of the spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring, as well as brainwashed Negroes as well. Okay. So let me know if that answers the question. Okay, another question. Before it was made known to you that you were an Akhan soul, did you only speak the language of ancient Kemet in prayer? So yes, that's a good question. So, and this is part of that process. Before we found out from the Nsamanfo directly about our ancestors. So when you don't know what specific clan you come from, our ancestral language, we're talking about language, the primal language, the primordial language goes back to ancient Khanat, Nubia, ancient Kemet. We're not just talking about dynastic Kemet of, 6,000 years ago and so forth. We're talking about tens of thousands of years ago. Our people, in their own words, written in the culture of Kemet, in so-called Turin papyrus and so forth, will talk about the establishment of a governmental structure in ancient Kemet 42,000+ years ago. And they have the numbers laid out. So we're talking about a primordial language, parent language. That primordial parent language of our people is reflected in that language of ancient Khanat and Kamit and so forth. So if you do not know what specific group you come from, you can utilize the parent language that these various languages all over the continent come from. And that's that ancient language of Khanat and Kamit. And again, not dynastic Kemet, but going back tens of thousands of years. All of the languages are related. That's why you can use it, take an Akhan dictionary, Yoruba, Chiluba, Basa, whatever, and connect them and compare them with a hieroglyphic dictionary and find the same words, concepts, deities, descriptive titles, place names, and so forth, because they are descended from that primordial language. So when we don't know who we are, we go back to that primordial language, Sankofa, return, go on, grasp from our ancestral past to solve our problems and issues in the present. And we're directed to do so by our Nsamanfo, the Akutu, the illuminated ones, as they're described in ancient Kemet, the ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated. It is their responsibility to direct us to the knowledge of what ancestral clan we come from. That's part of their job. It's not just they may or may not do it. It's their responsibility. And they look forward to, informing us of that. And they push us in that direction throughout the course of our lives towards sculptures and motifs and language and people who are part of our ancestral clan, so that at some point we find out and we realize all along we were put in position to come across these people all along. So, yes, we go to that ancestral language. We utilize the language of Kemet. And we have a specific prayer that we compose, the basic prayer. You can use the libation prayer in the language of Kemet on the website. It's called a sample Apai prayer in the language of Kemet using tree vocalizations and so forth. We have that basic prayer that anybody can use. You can look in the text of ancient Kemet, those various prayers that you see, and utilize those. When you're looking for the vocalizations, how they vocalize, how the nouns pronounce, you look in the living languages of today, and you'll find those proper vocalizations. So utilize that language, and they will direct you as to what group you come from. It's part of their responsibility. Number one, as Akutu ancestors and ancestors. Number two, to correct wrong. The wrong was the whites and their offspring invaded ancient Kemet. Some of our people allowed that to take place. Some of our people allowed them to infiltrate before the invasion. because we were dominant over them, and some of our people were brainwashed and said, well, we're dominant, these are little weak people, we can let them come in and trade because they could never defeat us. We've never been subjected to anyone else's rule in thousands of years because we're original. Our people had no concept 6,000 years ago of being ruled by the whites and their offspring. Whites and their offspring were just inferior parasites showing up on the coasts of ancient Kemet. Our people couldn't imagine ever being ruled by this inferior group. So some of our people were like, well, the little inferior group can come in and trade, even though they're our enemies, they can come in and trade. And in fact, they can live in part of society. So there was a conflict there. Some of our people that, allowed that to take place. And that set the stage and sowed the seeds of dissension later on. So, like that cancer developing within a person over 30 plus years, but not realizing the issue the first year because they think they're all right and they can handle the cigarette. That's what took place. So part of that responsibility is born of the fact they're in Samako, Akwamu, ancestral spirits, but two, to correct that wrong. Because of that process, we ended up becoming enslaved at some point because of what took place in the western and central part of the continent. Our people fighting, going against divine order, and not engaging in these military conflicts. Some of our people did engage in that nonsense, empire building and so forth, created, disdain from other Afurakani groups that were related and unrelated, and then that sowed the seeds of dissension because some of our people are allying with the white Arabs and getting involved in that nonsense. Some of our people are against that. And now there's infighting between two black groups because one of them are following Islam and that nonsense with Christianity, and some of our people are not. The divinities directing us not to engage in that nonsense, not to be in conflict with one another. Some of our people go against that anyway. That creates division. And then when the whites and their offspring as parasites show up on the coast saying, when you all are at war, you can sell the prisoners of war to us, and we're allied with you to fight the other black group that you don't like. All of that sows seeds of dissension, and therefore some of our people get caught up and forced into the Western Hemisphere, all as a result of some of our people disobeying the Obosom, the forces in nature, compromising our own spiritual immunity, and now these little maggots, these little parasites can latch on and cause problems when our immunity has become compromised. If your immunity is not compromised, the parasite is going to come no matter what because they're criminal and they're perverse. But you can repel them and destroy them easily. Just like bacteria is trying to attack your system now, but you're constantly fighting it off. But if you compromise your immunity, the weak parasites will now be able to get in and cause you a great deal of, problems. So our people's responsibility to return us to our ancestral clan, not just because they're in Samako and that's part of their job, but also to correct the wrong of the past that put us in the position to not know what our ancestral language is. So they look forward to reconnecting with us like that. And you start with that primal language, and through that process, your Nsamafo will direct you as to who you are, because it's important, as we say, we didn't just come directly from ancient Kemet and ended it up in the Western Hemisphere. We moved through West Central Afuraitkaitnut, connected with the Obosom of those regions, incorporated their energy. It changed our dialect, it changed our ritual expressions, it changed certain taboos and so forth. Those are written into our nature as well. So we must acknowledge and honor those things, or else we'll put ourselves out of harmony with divine order as well. So we need to know about our ancient ancestral blood circle, but also our recent ancestral blood circles with regard to where we come from on the continent, because that's written into our nature and how we need to operate in the world today. Okay. Another question, was it the Asante Akhan that were mostly captured and brought to the Americas? No, it was Asante, Fanti, Akwamu, Denchira, a number of Jamain people, a number of different Akhan groups. So it wasn't just the Asante. You'll find in certain regions, you can see that influence. If there were certain time periods where the whites and their offspring were at certain parts or in certain areas of the continent. And if there was a war, for example, when there was a civil war within the Asante nation, Asante fighting Asante in the late, quote-unquote, 1800s, then at that particular period, when those people who were defecting or getting captured as prisoners of war and the whites and their offspring were capturing them, purchasing them as prisoners of war and then selling our people into the West, you will have a larger influx of Asante captives because there was a civil war and there were many more prisoners of war as a result of it being a civil war. So at that point, in certain areas, you will have a larger percentage than normal of Asante captives than you would have had 25 years before that. So, and then depending on who the whites and offspring were trying to support or ally themselves with, or parasitically attach themselves to, sometimes they would have a larger contingent of Fanti people who were enslaved, or a larger contingent of Akwamu. For example, on St. John's Island, Cinnamon Bay, when the Akwamu in the Caribbean took over the island for 6 months and, freed themselves, waged war against the whites and offspring and freed themselves and took over militarily for 6 months, they identify that as an Akwamu uprising. So depending on where you are, what took place, we can identify some of the Akwamu presence in the dialect of Twi. It goes into the terms you find in Hudu, Ndu, and so forth. You can see this Akwamu Twi manifest in the expression of language of Hudu in North America, for example. So it just depends on what was taking place at the time, true story. So we want to scroll through, make sure we didn't miss anything. If you don't know the words for something or how to express, the question is, or how to express in our language, can we just visualize what we are trying to say? Absolutely. So, and that's natural. That's a natural thing because you're doing that anyway. And that's the key. And that's why we went through that process of when you talk about speaking, before you release the sound vibrations, first mechanically and technically, you have to recall, and it takes only a few nanoseconds to recall which English words fit what I'm feeling so that I can express what I'm feeling to somebody else. So you go through that process all the time. You have experience. Those experiences register within your spirit. Sometimes, you're visualizing these things. It's very quick. And then you find the English words. You've learned how to find English words. First, you have to learn English. You have to learn the words and what they mean. And then you learn how to associate the feelings that you're having with the English words, and you match those up, and then you speak those English words. And that takes just a few nanoseconds. So you engage in that process all along. The only thing we're saying now, of course, is when you have those experiences, you don't have to wrap English words with them. You just discard that step, that final step, and remove it as a step. And you have those experiences, and you project those to the Nsumafo. And just like a child who cannot yet speak, they just cry. But that cry is really a prayer, it's an invocation to the mother, the great mother, and so forth. Those sound vibrations of the cry alone is enough for them the great mother to come and feed the baby. Us sitting in front of the shrine, giving an offering and so forth, and whether it's pouring libation or food offering and so forth, and sitting down and projecting the energy of our spirit and our mind, consciousness, to them, they already know what we're going through and they respond to that. That's what they're always responding to. That's all they've ever responded to who are speaking in English. If we know our ancestral language, we can wrap those ideas with the language of our, of our ancestry, and that language, those descriptions are harmonious because they resound the actual, experience that we're having. So those sound vibrations that we hear are positively stimulating physiologically. The sound vibrations stimulating our eardrums and stimulating our physical body. Just like you have sound, you can hear sound resonate within your body. Loud music can resonate, make your chest vibrate and so forth. Sounds, when you hear them, the sound of someone's voice speaking, that stimulates the sound vibration, has an effect upon you physically. So when we speak the ancestral language, the sound vibrations affect us physically in a positive capacity, but spiritually as well. But this is what they've always been doing, so that's the key. You've always been engaged in the process of wrapping words around your expressions, your energetic expressions. You don't have to wrap the English words around that anymore, and we never really did, but ritually, because the Nsumafo have always been responding to your energetic projections all along. If, in addition to your energetic expressions, you can now add an ancestral language to convey that, then that's harmonious as well, and they respond to that as well. But if you don't know the language yet, they respond directly to this energy emanating from your spirit right now. And of course, even when, in the real sense, when people get possessed during ritual practice and speaking in tongues and so forth, not when people are faking in church and all of that, but people get possessed in ancestral religious practices, whether they're formally involved or not, an ancestral spirit possesses and speaks their ancestral language, they'll say, oh, they're speaking in tongues. It's an ancestral spirit speaking the traditional language, and they will speak the language to people so they can learn it. So we have the capacity to reconnect. We've always had that capacity. Even when we don't know the language, we can still connect. All right. And we just want to make sure we didn't miss anything else. Okay, as we're going through the chat room, take a few calls on the phone line. The chair on the phone line, number 5306. You had a question or a comment?
Yeah, Miki Amu. Kwesi Ra. Thank you for sharing.
Okay.
All right. I'm calling regarding is there any type of rhythms that you listen to, like vibrations as far as sound music that you listen to or you should suggest, or any groups that we could do, or meditation, or just doing chores throughout the house?
Well,
give off positive frequencies.
Well, now, of course, it depends on a person, but there are different genres of music. In reality, the different genres of music that we have created, when you look at them, you see that they're reflective of Obosom forces in creation. Even if you look at the Obosom that governs 7 days of the week, and you look at the different genres of music that we have. Now, of course, some people are, projecting some nonsense through music, but for the ones who are not, if you stay in that particular genre and connect with the ones who are doing something positive, hip-hop and so forth is more fiery, is more warrior-esque and so forth. That's like connected to Benin, Abena, like on Tuesday. You have jazz music that's similar to, connected to the Obosom, to like Amen and, Mimini, the energy on, Miminida, Saturday. You have R&B who's kind of connected to like Offset, Ajua and Ajo, the Obosom of the moon and so forth, connected to, Monday. So every genre that we have, that we've created, carries the energy of specific Obosom. So we can listen to these various genres as long as you listen to those in the genre who are not projecting idiotic messages within the music. But the genres themselves, whether it's blues or jazz or hip-hop or R&B or, neo-soul, whatever it is, they break down into the energy of that Obosom that was animating the people who founded those genres. It manifested those genres. So you can utilize any of them based on the nature of your spirit, based on how you're drawn by your own craft, your crowd, just, of course, making sure that the people are projecting a message in that kind of music that's, harmonious, that's grounded.
Sineb, I stay.
Okay. And we appreciate the call. And that includes, of course, traditional drumming, traditional song, which is call and response and everything else. We have various genres, even, some of what they would call Negro spirituals. Now, some of them are nonsensical, connected to church, but then other ones are not. They're actually, code songs for us escaping into, the forest and woods and everything else. Even when you look at ring shout, traditional ring shout dancing and so forth, that ring shout piece, we talked about that in the Hoodoo People book. We're dancing in a counterclockwise, circle. That's what people do on the continent. That's what we do in the Akhan tradition, generating a vortex of energy moving around the circle. The call and response aspect of it is what we've been doing for thousands of years. So even starting off with libation, the call and response, song, call and response, and we still do that. So we have various genres that are connected to, you know, as we said, different Obosom forces in creation. This is why we resonate with these genres of music. This is why the Whites and Offspring always seek to even infiltrate music and try to take it over. They try to take over blues or jazz, hip-hop. So everything that we do, they will try to take it over and corrupt it and divert it into something else because they're parasitic and they see the value or the power in something. So they will seek to destroy it because they know through music, for example, it hits directly to the spirit of the person. If there are proper messages embedded within the music that can stimulate the person and overthrow the government of the mind of the person when the government was a corrupt government, the government of the Whites and Offspring. What was governing your mind was the pseudo-philosophy of the Whites and Offspring. You can overthrow that government that's been forced on you for decades with one song. One song can stimulate the person in a deep way where they want to, you know, seek to re-embrace that culture, reject everything perverse. So years of brainwashing that the Whites and Offspring, you know, invested can be overthrown in one song. So this is why they sought to invade hip-hop, R&B, jazz, blues, everything that we create, they seek to invade that and try to make it appear that it's just a, you know, entertainment. But in reality, it's communication. There are Obosom deities that govern song and, of course, speech, incantations, and so forth. They don't want us to connect on that primal level with the Obosom. So there's a question, another question in the chat room. Will you speak on Cameroon spirituality? So we can get some, we appreciate that suggestion. So we can, in an upcoming broadcast, we can probably in the next ODWIRA broadcast or after, we can bring some of that information in as well. We can look at the different ethnic groups that you find in Cameroon, and then look at some of the, you know, ancestral religious practices on, you know, just a foundational level, so people can, and of course, foundationally, wherever we are, the information is foundationally similar, but then there's differences in language, expression, and things like that. Some things we have mentioned on a foundational level. So, for example, if you pull up some information, we'll pull up some information right now, just to give you an example of what we're talking about. So if you look at the demographics in Cameroon, if you look at the different languages, hold on one second. In fact, let's look at the different, pull up real quick some of the major ethnic groups in Cameroon. And it's give you an example of how to, you know, look at some information, begin to dig through this information, and also connect it, the language and culture, with ancient Kemet and so forth. So we mentioned, for example, the Fang are in Cameroon, the Fulani, we were talking about the Fulani a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the Berbers and so forth. The Bassa, we mentioned the Bassa sometimes, they're also connected to Liberia. So, for example, the Fang people, in certain dialects, we say Nyame, the great god, Nyame, the great mother, Nyamewa. Then you'll have amongst some of the Fang, the great god is Nzame, Nzame amongst the Fang, Nyame amongst the Akhan, Nzambi amongst the people of the Congo, Nyambi amongst the Lotsi people. We're all talking about the same great divinity. So you'll find those connections there when you look at the language and connect it to our ancient ancestral language and so forth. You'll find those connections. So yes, we can do, in the future, we can do some broadcasts dealing with Fang cosmology and so forth. Oh, and you mentioned the Ewondo. And you checked out your DNA test. So yes, we can get into some of that information as well in future broadcasts. So Medase, we appreciate that suggestion. And sometimes you'll see when we're talking about this information, we reference certain major groups in West and Central Afuraitkai, like the Yoruba and Akhan and Ewe and Mindi-speaking people. And one reason we do that is the vast majority of our people forced into the Western Hemisphere come from those large groups, but we, of course, recognize that there are many, many other groups as well, smaller groups, as well as some of the ones in Central and South Afuraitkai. Some of our people came from those groups as well, but we're going to get to those. We're going to be talking about more of those groups as well. Okay, so we're going to get back on the phone line real quick. Michelle on the phone line, number 5466. You had a question or a comment?
Nick, yeah, my brother. The first comment, man, keep up the good work. I've been studying, man. You talking about some really effectual things, really can impact the community if people get their hands on this. But moving forward, my question was, getting into the specifics. I don't know. I have a pretty good idea of what your answer is going to be, but like you've mentioned, the naming ceremony and the ceremony to tell which side of the bloodline, the mother or father, the cry came from. I have ablution ceremonies. I have libation ceremonies, but I didn't think about it until I heard you say, like, yeah, I should have some type of guideline to set up mine. Like, do you have a reference for me where I can find that, or could you go into that for me, the specifics of the various ceremonies and where I could get the information, or if you have it?
Well, now, when you're talking about learning specifically what ancestral group, ethnic group you come from, that part?
No, not even for me. I'm talking about for my daughter. I'm good. You know what I'm saying? With me, I'm talking about my daughter I just had. Like, to be honest with you, when she was born, I mean, it was an immediate connection. She looked just like me, but I don't want to make any assumptions. I have a strong idea. I mean, it's amazing how much she resembles me, but I don't want to be guessing. So I'm like, I might as well take those precautions so I know how to move forward into the future, like you were saying with the various ancestral things they should do and things that I should present to her and things I should not present to her.
Exactly. So now there's a couple of ways that people, deal with that process. Of course, typically there's some form of adebisa or divination, which can address that. But when we talk about adebisa, it's not just going to, a priest or a priestess or something to get divination. Every time you engage in the process inquiring or you query the Nsamanfo, Obosom, and so forth yourself, the term bisa, the verb bisa in Akhan means to ask or to inquire, and adebisa are things that are asked, and that's a term for divination. So every time you sit down and communicate with Nsamanfo, you're engaged in asking, you're engaged in bisa, so you're engaged in some oracular function at that moment. So whether you went to a priest or priestess, that the key is learning directly from your Nsamanfo, because they're the ones, these are your grandmothers, grandfathers, great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers who will direct you as to which one of their colleagues they sent into the world. Developing that relationship with them, we always emphasize, and we can't overemphasize, we can never overemphasize the value of developing a relationship with your Nsamanfo. That's the ritual centerpiece, the educational foundation of ancestral religion, connecting with the Nsamanfo, your spiritually cultivated, the non-NHOMA Nsamanfo, your spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. So they will share with you who's who. If this spirit comes from your side of the family or the white side of the family. And if it's a spirit from your side of the family, you'll be able to find out from them exactly who the spirit is. And then they'll put people in front of you to confirm that, to confirm what you learned spiritually. They will always give you multiple confirmations physically about what you were given spiritually, so you won't be, wondering whether or not you heard this or saw that or whatever. They always give that confirmation. So it always goes back to consistent, communication and engaging the Nsamanfo.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you went to a priest or priestess and they told you, well, once you got back home, you're going to have to decide whether or not that resonates with you. So you're still going to have to go to your Nsamanfo and confirm, is what the priest or priestess told me accurate? And, so you have to do that confirmation. And that's our responsibility to do that. So it always goes back to that same, getting them, maintaining that strong connection with your Nsamafo, and then them giving you those confirmations to solidify what they tell you spiritually.
Okay. And just real quick, I'm going to keep listening, but I'm going to mute myself. I have one more question. You remember I told you I was reading Kofi Bempa's book, man. I'm really enjoying it. And he keeps referencing Dankwa's book. But you remember you told me that, those books, even it's an interesting book, but I do respect the fact that you said that it's certain things in them that weren't true. It's certain things because they had been, dealing with the colonized world at that point. But do you have any books after I'm done with Kofi Bempa's that I might want to get my hands on to, add to my library? Because I don't want to lose this information. I had this strong feeling that in this Western world, over here, that we going to lose access to this information. Because it's certain books I got from, like, even the 1800s that could squash a lot of this mess, that, like, this Hebrew Israelite stuff and all this Moorish stuff. I got books from the 1800s that, like, if people could get their hands on them, they wouldn't even be messing with that stuff. So do you have any books that I could grab from my personal library that I could read and have around for my kids, man? And I'm going to mute myself right now. Peace.
Okay. We appreciate the call. So, well, on one hand, with regards to some of the books being, laws taken out of circulation, there are certain sites that they're preserving a lot of these things that you can get and download. So, for example, you go to archive.org, a lot of those books you were talking about from the 1800s and up, the copyright is, extended. It's done. It's expired. So some of these books you can download them. People often put books on scribe.com, SCRIBD.com, full books, the books that are out of print and everything. You can download them and save them yourself. You can print them out if you want to. For that. Oh, now before we go forward, there's about a minute left in the broadcast as far as online. If you want to listen beyond 11 o'clock, you got a minute to call in so you can get on the phone line. The call-in number is 657-383-0635. It's on the page on the channel, 657-383-0635. For those who can't stay on past 11, we won't go too much further beyond 11. Again, we will be in Hartford, Connecticut on Friday, Webster, New York, outside of Rochester on Saturday. See the event notification. If you'd like to support our free book giveaway, please go to the NHOMA page, our publications page now. You can purchase one or more of our books. We have discounts on the publications, as well as if you make a donation, of course, we appreciate that. But we are working to, cover the rest of the travel expenses for those trips and the free book giveaway to the community. NHOMA page, the publications page, you can do that. And we appreciate that. So with regards to the books, so you can get some of those out-of-print books that way, and other sites online as well. The book by Kofi Bempa, when it says Akhan Traditional Religion, he has good information in there, but then he has some misinformation. You'll see he quotes Sai Baba from India over and over and over again through the book, and this is an Akhan person who's, an older person in his 70s or 80s or whatever, talking about ancestral culture and religion and the Akhan philosophy. But there are certain things, that he moves towards atheism to a certain extent. So therefore, he misstates a great deal of the cosmology, or he'll try to say, Nana no Munsamafo is just another name for Nyame, which is ridiculous, trying to, remove this notion of Obosom or deities or separate entities that we need to invoke or be possessed by. They're trying to get away from all of that and trying to, conflate different titles into, this is just an expression of a primordial energy, and we really don't worship the Obosom because they still fear polytheism. Because crackers said that polytheism was inferior, which of course it is not. It's superior and it's real, and we get possessed by these forces of nature, so we know them, but the whites and offspring they fear that, so they don't want us to communicate with the forces of nature. So therefore they, promote that misinformation. And then some of our people are still promoting that misinformation because they are embarrassed by their own culture because they're brainwashed. So you'll see some of that floating around in that publication. But there's some good information and misinformation you have to read between the lines. You'll find the book Akhan Spirituality on Becoming Ancestors, talking about Akhan Cosmology by Don Kor. or African religion defined by Donkor, when he's talking about the Akhan, philosophy to a certain extent. He's not talking about the number of different deities and stuff like that, but talking about Akhan culture, the foundations of spirituality, the nature of the Kra, and different aspects of the spiritual anatomy to a certain extent. Certain things are not detailed, but it's some good information in there, but then you have to, of course, read between the lines, as always, until we, continue to begin to publish more work ourselves with the specific angle or focus that we have, knowing specific things that our people need to know, where certain other authors are just not focused on that, and certain things we know we need to reject and purge, and certain things we need to incorporate. We have that mindset, so we have to publish our own work. But whatever books you get, you have to always read between the lines. All right. Okay, there was another question in the chat room. You're going to the Cameroon. You're going to be meeting with a spiritual leader there. What should you do, say, and ask for? Let me make sure I didn't miss the second part of that question. Okay, so no matter what, anytime you go before anyone who's a spiritualist or whatever, it goes back to what we mentioned with the previous caller. You must establish a sound relationship, a grounded, firm relationship with your ancestresses and ancestors. That's your responsibility as an Afuraitkaitnit adult to connect with your people. We have ancestresses and ancestors who are assigned to guide us throughout the course of our lives before we even get into the womb. So we have some who guide us in that capacity. They are assigned to us by Nyamewa Nyame, the Supreme Being. It's our responsibility to align with them, because it's only through them that we learn how to navigate our ways through life based on the clan we come from, and harmonize our energy, our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and our energy output in harmony with divine order based on who we are, based on the specific clan we come from. The way we operate in creation is slightly different from the way another Afurakani group on the continent would operate, even though they're still harmonious, but we have our own ways, just like you have children who have allergies to certain foods and the other child in the family doesn't have an allergy. So based on who they are, you make, those changes in diet so you don't create disorder. Based on us as sibling groups all across the continent, there are certain ways that we approach things in one group, certain ways that we approach them in another group based on our structures we talked about earlier. So only the Nsamafo from your ethnic group can show you how to operate in harmony with divine order based on who you are. So you must establish that relationship with your Nsamafo so that when you go before, if you're drawn to go to a spiritual, spiritualist, diviner, and so forth, you're grounded. You're not just pulled in any different direction. You'll be able to know whether or not that person is a charlatan or not. You'll be able to know if you need to go to that person, or if you're feeling a negative push to get away from that particular individual and go to somebody else. So it always goes back to dealing with your people first. And whenever you get some information, as we said to the other caller, if once you come back from that, you need to be able to verify. You don't just blindly believe what someone says because they're a spiritualist. We verify what everybody says with our Nsamafo because they are spiritually cultivated, and nobody's more once you get to that class of Nananom Nsamafo or Aku, spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, nobody's more highly cultivated than that. So nobody can give you information that goes beyond what your Nsamafo have, the ones who are cultivated, because they are reflection and live in harmony with Nyame Wa Nyame Nsheshe, divine order. That's why they're called Nananom Nsamafo as opposed to just regular Nsamafo. So if what some spiritualist teaches you or shares with you is not in harmony with or doesn't comport with what your Nsamafo have told you and what your own craft has told you, then you reject what the spiritualist says because you know they don't know what they're talking about. But they're deliberately lying or because they just don't understand and they believe what they're saying, but they're just misinformed. So the key is being grounded yourself first, and then when you go before these people, then you'll understand, what to accept and what to reject, or whether to engage or not. So, just checking out in the chat room to make sure we didn't miss anything else. Okay. And we're going to get back on the phone lines. One more call on the phone line. Okay, Michio on the phone line, number 3289. You had a question or a comment?
Mmusuo Kese, how are you?
Good, Michio, what's up?
I'll share. Briefly, you mentioned in reference to people who have had these so-called speaking in tongues experiences in the Christian community and in other communities. Could you expound a little bit more on the role that the Okrawa plays in that experience, specifically with our primordial language that may have come through authentically in those experiences?
Okay, so and it's good you said authentically, because first we always make the separation. Of course, there's some people who fake that whole thing, speaking in tongues, and then there are other people who are really, an ancestral spirit is communicating. They get possessed, ancestral spirit speaks, and it is what it is. And we've been doing that for thousands and thousands of years. It has nothing to do with the Bible. It didn't originate with that nonsense. It's the real deal. So there are differences. So, putting aside the people who are just faking something, but the people who are really engaged in something, now there are different categories within that as well. There are some people who get possessed by an ancestral spirit or one of the Obosom, and they speak through them, and if somebody who knows the language, then they can verify, this is what they said. Or if you don't know the language, but you take note of what's spoken, then you go back and research it and study it, and you'll find out what it actually means. So that's one thing. Then you have another category of ancestral spirits or discarnate spirits that are not relatives, but they're still discarnate spirits who can possess as well, and they're not harmonious, and they're just saying sometimes some gibberish kind of things, or they're saying some other things, or communicating. People will say, well, a spirit just possessed them. Oh, they were speaking in tongues. I know they had a message for me. Oh, that is true, but what kind of message was it? What is the nature of that spirit? What is the provenance of that particular spirit? So it still goes back to having a relationship with the Nsamanfo to know who is coming through and who's not, who is to be repelled and who's not, who are we open to and who's not. It's no different than eating food. If you maintain your health, then you repel the negative toxins, bacteria that are streaming in from the outside all the time, and you get nourished from the food that you eat. If you take in the wrong things and you open yourself up to receive, suppress your own immunity. And it's the same thing spiritually. If you get out of alignment with order, because there's no consistency with the Nsamanfo and consistency with your own craft, then you open up your spirit body to be compromised with regard to your immunity. And then one of these weak little parasitic type discarnate relatives and non-relatives can penetrate and communicate or even possess to a certain extent certain people. And then they're quote-unquote speaking in tongues, or even if they're not possessed, they're just heavily influenced by some spirit near them, and they pick up on what they're saying, and then they repeat it, and they say, well, there's a spirit had a message, and it's nonsensical. But if you have your Nsamanfo communicating or Obosom communicating, or if your craft, you're listening or tuning to your craft, and you're directed to speak certain words or terms and so forth, then that's an authentic communication. Your Nsamanfo or the Obosom or your craft will speak through you, so you can speak those certain things in the midst of a community, in the presence of one or more people, so that they can receive that information. Or sometimes, like we were talking about with regard to language, so that you can hear specific things, so those sound vibrations can recalibrate you, even if you're not in the presence of somebody else to hear the information. Sometimes it's no different than, singing. Sometimes people can sing and it'll soothe their spirit because the sound vibrations literally recalibrate them. In the same fashion, sometimes spirit coming through to release a specific message, those sound vibrations are recalibrating to the person, even if nobody's in front of you. But the key is making the determination between, is it the Okra Is it the Obosom? Is it the NHOMA Samafo? Or is it just some discarnate relative or non-relative trying to, push some information forward? So that's the key.
Marase, appreciate the insight, and thank you for your response.
Okay, and Yeni Aseda, we appreciate the call. Okay, so that was all of the phone calls, it looks like, and we want to make sure we didn't miss anything in the chat room with regard to any questions. So we're just scrolling through real quick, make sure we didn't miss anything. Okay, so I think we got all of those questions in the chat room as we're going through, and it's about 11:12, so we can end it right here. But again, if you came on a little bit later, check the website. We already posted the event coming up for Meminidot Saturday in Webster, New York, just outside of Rochester. That's already on Facebook. We will be posting the information for the event in Hartford, Connecticut, coming up this Speed Out Friday, November 27th. So check our Facebook page for that. Yet I say we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast. Please support the effort. You can go to our NHOMA page now, the publications page, to support the work that we are doing, whether through purchase or donation. Yet I say for your support, because we are working to get that free book giveaway. Do that once again, as well as just maintaining these free workshops in these different cities and being able to travel from city to city to do free workshops. The way we are able to do that is through the support of our work from the community. So the NHOMA page is, the publications page is where you can purchase the books or make a achete donation. So again, Yerase, we thank you for tuning in, and Yebeshi Abio, we will meet again. That's up.